Everyone thinks economic collapse is sudden. A market crash. A currency falling overnight. A crisis that appears out of nowhere. But what if collapse isn't sudden at all? What if it's slow, predictable, almost inevitable? And what if someone, nearly 700 years ago, already explained exactly how it happens? Not with equations, not with modern economics, but with a deeper understanding of power, society, and human nature. Because, long before modern economists tried to explain why nations rise and fall, a North African scholar quietly mapped out the entire cycle. And if you listen closely, you'll realize we might already be somewhere inside it. Welcome to Money Records, where money, power, and history collide. To understand Ibn Khaldun, you have to step into a very different world. The year is 1332. Europe is still recovering from plagues and instability. Kingdoms rise and fall quickly. But across North Africa and parts of the Islamic world, something else is happening. Empires are forming. Trade is expanding. Cities are growing. Wealth is accumulating. And yet, beneath all that growth, there's a pattern no one seems to notice. A pattern of rise, peak, and collapse. Ibn Khaldun didn't just live through this cycle. He studied it. Born in Tunis, he grew up surrounded by political chaos. Dynasties clashing. Governments collapsing. Leaders rising, and then disappearing just as quickly. Most people saw disorder. He saw a system, and unlike most scholars of his time, he wasn't satisfied with surface explanations. He didn't ask, what happened? He asked, why does this keep happening? What he discovered would become one of the earliest and most unsettling frameworks for understanding economies and power. Because Ibn Khaldun didn't believe civilizations collapse because of bad luck. He believed they collapse because of success. At the heart of his thinking was a concept called asabiyya. You can think of it as social cohesion. Group unity, collective strength. It's the invisible force that binds people together. In the beginning, when a group is small, struggling, and united, their asabiyya is strong. They cooperate. They sacrifice. They build. This is where empires are born. But success changes things. As wealth grows, comfort increases. And comfort weakens people. The same group that once fought for survival begins to fight over luxury. Discipline fades. Unity fractures. As wealth grows, comfort increases. And comfort weakens people. The same group that once fought for survival begins to fight over luxury. Discipline fades. Unity fractures. People become more focused on status than survival. More focused on consumption than contribution. And slowly, almost invisibly, the foundation begins to crack. Ibn Khaldun saw this not once, but over and over again. And then he asked a dangerous question. What if prosperity itself is the beginning of decline? This is where his thinking becomes deeply economic. Because for Ibn Khaldun, the health of a society wasn't just about politics. It was about how money flowed. In the early stages of a civilization, taxes are low. Why? Because people are productive. They work. They build. They trade. The economy grows naturally. The state doesn't need to extract much, because there's already abundance being created. But as rulers become more powerful and more comfortable, their needs grow. Palaces. Armies. Luxury. And to sustain that lifestyle, they turn to the easiest tool available. Taxes. At first, the increase is small, barely noticeable. But over time, it grows. And something subtle begins to happen. People start working less. Not because they're lazy, but because the reward for effort is shrinking. Why build more if most of it will be taken? Why take risks if the system punishes success? This is what Ibn Khaldun understood centuries before modern economists. High taxation doesn't just take wealth. It destroys incentives. And once incentives collapse, the economy follows. He described this as a cycle. At the beginning of a dynasty, low taxes, high productivity, strong growth. At the peak, moderate taxes, stable economy, visible wealth. At the decline, high taxes, weak production, shrinking economy. And at the end, desperation. Governments raise taxes even more, trying to fix the problem. But instead of increasing revenue, they accelerate collapse. It's a trap. And once a society falls into it, escape becomes almost impossible. But Ibn Khaldun didn't stop there. He looked deeper. Because taxation was just one symptom. The real problem was something else. The transformation of leadership. In the early days, leaders are connected to the people. They understand struggle. They value contribution. But as generations pass, leaders become distant. Detached. They inherit power, but not the discipline that built it. And with that detachment comes a dangerous shift. Governments stop serving the economy and start exploiting it. This is where corruption enters the system. Not always in obvious ways. Not always through theft, but through something more subtle. Unfair advantages. Manipulated markets. Favoritism. When rulers begin to participate in business, not as regulators, but as competitors, they distort the entire system. Private merchants can't compete. Innovation slows. And trust begins to erode. For Ibn Khaldun, trust wasn't just a moral concept. It was economic infrastructure. Without trust, contracts mean nothing. Without trust, markets stop functioning. Without trust, money itself loses meaning. And once trust is gone, no amount of wealth can save a society. He also warned about something that feels incredibly modern: government dependence on easy money. When revenues fall, instead of fixing the system, states look for shortcuts. They borrow. They extract more. They manipulate anything to delay the consequences. But delay is not prevention. It's accumulation. And eventually, the cost becomes too large to hide. What makes Ibn Khaldun so powerful isn't just his analysis. It's how accurate it feels today. Look around. You'll see economies with rising debt. You'll see increasing taxation pressures. You'll see widening inequality. You'll see governments struggling to balance growth with control. And most importantly, you'll see declining trust. In institutions, in leadership, in the system itself. This is exactly the phase Ibn Khaldun described as the turning point. The moment when a civilization still looks strong from the outside, but is weakening from within. Because collapse doesn't start with empty khaza'in. It starts with broken incentives, broken trust, broken unity. And here's the most uncomfortable part. People inside the system rarely recognize it. Why? Because decline feels normal. It doesn't arrive as a single event. It arrives as a series of small changes. A little more pressure, a little less opportunity, a little more instability. Until one day, the system that once felt permanent suddenly doesn't. Ibn Khaldun believed that every civilization carries the seeds of its own decline. Not because people are evil, but because human nature doesn't change. Success leads to comfort. Comfort leads to complacency. Complacency leads to decay. And decay eventually leads to collapse. But this isn't a message of hopelessness. It's a warning, because understanding the cycle changes how you see the world. It makes you question growth. It makes you analyze policy. It makes you pay attention to incentives, not just outcomes. And most importantly, it helps you recognize where we might be in the cycle. Because history doesn't repeat exactly. But patterns repeat all the time. And Ibn Khaldun didn't just describe those patterns. He exposed the logic behind them. A logic rooted not in numbers, but in human behavior. So the next time you hear about economic growth, or rising markets, or expanding wealth, ask yourself a different question. Is this the beginning of strength, or the peak before decline? Because if Ibn Khaldun was right, the answer might already be unfolding around us. Quietly. Slowly. Inevitably. And if this gave you a new perspective, subscribe to Money Records. Because the past doesn't just explain the present, it warns you about the future.